Before we begin with the naval battle against the Venetii, don't forget to subscribe. Let us begin.
Although there were considerable difficulties in waging this war, as outlined previously, many factors still incited Caesar. The injury of detaining Roman knights, the revolt after surrender, the defection despite giving hostages, and the conspiracy of so many states, particularly to prevent other nations from thinking they could do the same with impunity.
Thus, understanding that nearly all the Gauls were eager for new disturbances and quickly aroused to war, and knowing that all men naturally desire freedom and hate the condition of servitude, he thought it best to divide his forces and spread his army more widely before more states could conspire.
Therefore, he sent Titus Labienus with the cavalry to the Treveri, who are closest to the Rhine. He instructed him to visit the Remi and the other Belgae to keep them loyal and to prevent the Germans, who were said to be called by the Belgae for help, from crossing the river.
He ordered Publius Crassus to set out with 12 legionary cohorts and a large number of cavalry into Aquitania to prevent auxiliaries from those nations from being sent into Gaul, and to keep such large nations from uniting.
He sent the legate Quintus Titurius Sabinus with 3 legions to the Venelli, Coriosolites, and Lexovi to hold off their forces.
He put the young Decimus Brutus in charge of the fleet and the Gallic ships, which he ordered to assemble from the Pictones, Santones, and other pacified regions, and instructed him to set out against the Venetii as soon as possible. Caesar himself marched with the foot soldiers.
The positions of their towns were generally such that they were located on the ends of tongues of land or promontories, and had no access for foot soldiers when the tide from the sea had come in, which happens twice every 12 hours, nor for ships, because when the tide went out, the ships would be damaged on the shallows. Thus, the assault on their towns was hindered by both circumstances. If they were overwhelmed by the scale of our works, such as embankments and piers extending into the sea, equal in height to the walls of the towns, and started to despair of their fortunes, they would bring all their possessions aboard their numerous ships, which they had in great abundance, and move to the nearest towns, using the same advantages of location to defend themselves there. This they could easily do for a significant part of the summer, because our ships were detained by storms, and there was great difficulty in navigating such a vast and open sea, with high tides and few, if any, harbors. Their ships were built and armed in this manner. The keels were flatter than those of our ships, making it easier for them to handle the shallows and tidal retreats. Their prows and sterns were very high to withstand the size of the waves and storms. They were made entirely of oak to endure any force or collision. The crossbeams were fastened with iron nails as thick as a thumb. The anchors were secured with iron chains instead of ropes. The sails were made of skins and thin leather, either due to a lack of flax and ignorance of its use, or more likely because they thought such large and powerful sails would not withstand the vast ocean storms and winds.
When these ships engaged with our fleet, they had the advantage in speed and maneuverability, while other aspects were more suitable for the local conditions and the violence of the storms.
Our ships could not damage them with the prow because of their great strength, and because of their height, it was difficult to hurl projectiles at them or hold them with grappling hooks.
Furthermore, when the wind began to blow violently and they gave themselves to the wind, they could more easily weather the storm and anchor safely in the shallows, fearing neither the rocks nor the shoals. All these risks had to be feared by our ships.
After several towns were captured, Caesar, realizing that his efforts were in vain, as capturing towns did not prevent the enemy from fleeing nor cause them any significant harm, decided to wait for his fleet.
When it finally assembled and was first seen by the enemy, about 220 of their ships, fully equipped with all types of weapons, set sail from the harbor and lined up against ours. Brutus, who was in charge of the fleet, along with the military tribunes and centurions, each commanding individual ships, were uncertain about what to do or how to engage in the battle.
They had realized that their ships could not be damaged by ramming. Although towers had been erected, the height of the enemy ship's sterns surpassed them, so that weapons thrown from a lower position could not be hurled effectively, and those thrown by the Gauls from above struck with greater force.
One device prepared by our men proved very useful. sharp hooks attached to long poles, not unlike the hooks used for scaling walls.
When the ropes that fastened the yards to the masts were caught and pulled by these, the ships were quickly rowed forward, causing the ropes to snap.
With these cut, the yards fell, and since the Gallic ships depended entirely on their sails and rigging, their use of the ships was completely disabled. The remaining contest depended on the courage of the soldiers, in which our men had a clear advantage, especially since the battle took place in full view of Caesar and the entire army, so that any act of bravery could not go unnoticed. All the hills and high places from which there was a clear view of the sea were occupied by our troops.
Once the yards were cut down, as mentioned, and 2 or 3 of our ships surrounded each of theirs, our soldiers fought with great energy to board the enemy ships. When the barbarians saw this, and that many of their ships were being taken, they sought safety in flight.
As they turned their ships in the direction the wind was blowing, suddenly there was such a calm and stillness that they could not move. This situation was very advantageous for completing the task. Our men, pursuing each ship individually, captured them, so that very few of the whole fleet managed to reach land during the night, after fighting from about the 4th hours in the afternoon until sunset.
With this battle, the war with the Venetii and the entire maritime region was concluded. Since all the youth and all the elders who had any wisdom or rank had gathered there, and since they had concentrated all their ships from everywhere into one place, with these lost, the remaining people had nowhere to retreat to, nor could they defend their towns.
Therefore, they surrendered themselves and all their possessions to Caesar. Caesar decided to exact a harsher punishment on them, to ensure that in the future, the rights of envoys would be respected by the barbarians. Thus, he executed the entire Senate and sold the rest into slavery.
While these events were taking place among the Venetii, Quintus Titurius Sabinus arrived in the territory of the Venelli with the forces Caesar had given him.
Viridovix commanded these forces and held supreme authority over all the tribes that had revolted. He had gathered a large army from these tribes, and a few days earlier, the Alerci Aberavices and the Lexivii had killed their senate because they did not want to start a war, and they closed their gates and joined Viridovix.
Furthermore, a large number of desperate men and robbers from all over Gaul had gathered, drawn by the hope of plunder and the desire for war, abandoning agriculture and daily labor.
Sabinus kept his troops in camp in a suitable location, while Viridovix encamped about 2 miles away, offering battle daily. This caused Sabinus to be held in contempt, not only by the enemy, but also somewhat by his own soldiers, who believed he was showing fear. This was precisely what Sabinus intended, for he did not believe he should engage in battle with such a large number of enemies without Caesar, who held supreme command, unless he could do so on favorable ground or given some opportunity.
With this perception of fear firmly established, Sabinus chose a cunning and suitable man, a Gaul among those he had with him as auxiliaries. Promising him great rewards, he persuaded him to defect to the enemy and convey what he wished.
Pretending to be a deserter, the man went to the enemy and portrayed the Romans' fear, explaining how Caesar was being hard-pressed by the Venetii, and that it wouldn't be long before Sabinus would secretly lead his army out of the camp at night to provide aid to Caesar.
Upon hearing this, the Gauls all clamored that this was an opportunity not to be missed. They should attack the Roman camp. Many factors encouraged them to this decision.
Sabinus' delay in recent days, the confirmation of the deserter, their lack of provisions, the hope of success in the Venetic War, and their tendency to believe what they wanted. Influenced by these factors, they did not let Viridovix and the other leaders leave the council until they agreed to the attack. The Gauls, pleased and confident of victory, gathered brushwood and branches to fill the Roman ditches and proceeded to the camp. If you, like me, are looking forward to see what is happening next, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.